This meeting is being recorded.
Hey everyone, I'm so happy to be here. Although it's like 11 o'clock at night here and it's freezing cold, so I'm all rugged up. So thank you for being patient and bearing with me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Fabulous. So so shall I just share for the next 45 minutes?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Sure. Well, I am a water researcher and I've been studying water in its crystallographic form for the last 9 years. So essentially what I've discovered is that water is able to store information that's relative to its last influence. For example, I could put a shell into a petri dish of water, freeze it using my method of short-term crystallography, and in the ice I will see some kind of evidence of a shell. And I have over 64,000 photos of water responding in this intelligent manner. So this all began with my own curiosity about whether water could store information or not. Many people have heard of Masaru Emoto's work and his investigations into water and water crystals, and how, for example, he could take 2 glasses of water, one with the word hate and one with the word love. He would flash freeze a little bit of water from each and identify that the one with the word love would form beautiful geometries and the one with the word hate would fail to form structures. So really what he was doing was flash freezing water and then microscopically photographing it. There was another man by the name of Laurent Costa who was not so well known but incredible man and has become a friend of mine. He's a French photographer. He also took microscopic photographs of water, but he really thought of water as his spiritual teacher, and he didn't want to experiment on water. He really wanted water to share with him whatever it wanted. And so he would do things like smile at the water before he froze it microscopically and photograph it. And what he was getting in the microscopic photos was really remarkable. He was seeing happy faces, he was seeing hearts, he was seeing fish appear in the ice. And when I saw that, I was just so amazed, because it's one thing seeing geometries, because we're kind of used to seeing things like snowflakes and close-ups of snowflakes, and they're beautiful. But when you see smiley faces and when you see imagery, it kind of makes you feel something quite different. And so I often say after all these years that art is the heart of water. It loves to design. And the last person who inspired me towards this work, his name was Thomas Hieronymus. He was a radionic engineer. And one day he went into a Parisian meat market and he observed that the freshly placed organs of an animal appeared to be affecting the way the frost froze on the glass behind where they were placed. For example, the frost would freeze into the shape of a liver organ above an actual liver organ, and so on and so forth. And his hypothesis was there still appeared to be some kind of life force energy still emanating out of these organs, even though they were no longer attached to an animal. And he put that down to there being water in the blood. And so he thought that the water in the blood was somehow communicating with the water in the air, and then the water in the air was freezing into this kind of blueprint memory of the organ itself. And what encouraged me really with his observations was he was seeing these with his naked eye. They were essentially macro. And what that meant was that he was observing something on a very large scale where everybody else was using microscopes. So 9 years ago, I didn't have a microscope, but I did have a glass petri dish. I had some beautiful spring water and I had my imagination. And I've always been one to investigate things for myself rather than believe everything I see and read. And so I really, really wanted to just understand if water could actually store information. So I put some water into a petri dish, and my idea was that I would project a thought into the water and freeze it, because the secret was in the freezing. And so I held my dish and I was thinking about what I was going to think about, and I noticed a little bit of fluff floating around in the water. So I put my hand in to take the fluff out, consciously thinking, I wonder if my hand will have any impact on the water's quote unquote memory, because I didn't know if that was a real thing. So I thought, well, that'll do. And I put it into my freezer with the peas and the broccoli and the ice cream and everything. And I didn't really think much more of it. Then I went about my day, and a few hours later I came back thinking, oh, you know, there's that petri dish, let's see what it's doing. So I took it out of the freezer and I held it up to the light and I took a photograph on my iPhone. And that photo has launched all these thousands of photos now. And it really launched my absolute passion for this work in this field with water. What I saw that took up half of the petri dish was literally a hand in the ice. It's actually like the water uses these building blocks of ice to design. And the hand looks somewhat like an X-ray. And I have slightly crooked fingers on these two fingers. I can't even do it without pushing them down. They bend slightly. And the actual image in the ice, you can see on the same fingers, they bend. And it was so realistic that I was kind of freaked out. I was not expecting to see a hand in the ice that was so clear. And I went and I showed my son the photo, and he didn't know what I was doing. The only way I can show the photograph, I'm using my husband's computer right now. So I can only show you from my phone. So let me find it. There are many, many, many photos, and the examples are actually on my website. So you're more than welcome to go to my website and have a look, which is vedaustin.com. Here we are. So I'm going to enlarge it and show you. I don't know if you can see.
Move it a bit to one side. There you go. Yeah.
So as you can see, it looks very much like the X-ray of a hand. And so from there, after showing my son, I asked him what he thought it was, and he said, well, it's a hand, Mum. And so after that, I went down to the beach, as I thought if any water is going to be informed, surely it would be seawater. And when I brought the seawater back, I froze a little bit of it, and I was kind of nervous before I actually pulled that dish out of the freezer, because I thought, well, if I'm going to see something, if I see something relative to the ocean, then this means something quite unimaginable. This is massive. So as I tentatively pulled it out of the freezer and looked at it, held it up to the light and took a photograph, what I saw was this incredible fish. It had gills, it was the shape of the fish, it had a perfectly round eye. And really, I mean, it blew my mind. It was really remarkable. And so that's when my freezer really became my most used household appliance. And I started doing just test after test after test. And I can show you some examples, but they're really all, there's many on my website. And this is all from my website.
Again, move it just a bit. There we go. There, now I've got it.
You can see that in this one, I used my my friend's photograph as the influence. I placed my petri dish of water on top of her photo for 30 seconds and froze it using the technique that I've developed, which I'll talk about in a minute.
Okay.
And you can see what I've done here. I've put the petri dish of water on top of this black and white photo. That might be later. Sorry, I'm just going to turn this thing off. And it continues on and on and on. Again, people can go to my website and view all of these images. And there's a lot of different examples here, from skulls and feet and hands and thumbs. And there's many, many, many. I have thousands, literally. And so what I developed and what I discovered over the years was that, well, actually it was in the first year, I was very interested in the new science of water. Dr. Gerald Pollack, he's the world's leading water scientist. He talks about this fourth phase of water, the stage between liquid and solid. And it is kind of a gel or plasma. So there's a liquid, solid, gas, and then this kind of fourth phase, which is has different properties. And so I was very interested to see what was happening in the freezer as the water was freezing. So I started to open the freezer earlier and earlier and earlier. And after around about 5 minutes, I noticed that something interesting was happening. There was ice that was forming on the bottom of the Petri dish, but there was liquid still on the top. So what I did was I pulled it out, and when I held it up to the light to see the crystallography, the water tipped out. And what was left was what I now term as the first freeze. So as water freezes, it freezes in layers. And the very first layer holds the most information that is most relative to the influence. I put it, an analogy is like, when you were little, when I was little, we were given a piece of paper and a glue stick, and we were asked to draw a picture with the glue, and then we were given some glitter, and we would sprinkle the glitter all over the glue, and the glitter would stick to the glue. You'd hold it up, you'd shake it, and then the rest of the glitter would fall away, and you had this lovely glue and glitter picture. Well, the glue is like your conscious expression, and the first freeze is kind of like how the water that has been very attracted to your conscious expression, and that has frozen. And the liquid is akin to the glitter that falls away. And so after studying how water freezes, what you'll see is that it freezes in layers that have spaces in between. And in the workshops, because I teach people how to do this, and I did one just this morning, when you have about 2 or 3 layers, they all share information, but the most complex is always the first one. So getting that first freeze right is really, really important. And it's actually really, really simple. It's just about understanding what you're looking for. And after doing this, I started to see much more clarity in my work. And the images were more 3-dimensional. They had just so much light coming through, and they looked very different than the original images that I did, where I completely froze water. Actually, when I look back at my work now, I am amazed that I got as much imagery as I did when I would completely freeze water, because I haven't done that in such a long time. So as I started to observe that water is able to design, and not just an imagery that you kind of like, oh, maybe it looks like a cat, maybe it looks like a tree, but actually it's image recognition. So for example, my friend and mentor, Dr. Jerry Pollack, that I mentioned earlier, he said, well, why don't you put together a survey and put maybe 25 pictures together and simply say, what does this image look like to you? And a few years ago, I did that. And I gave it to friends to circulate throughout social media so that no one knew it came from me, and no one actually knew what they were even looking at. They didn't know that it was actually ice. So I'll add that you might see colors coming through my work when you go and have a look at it. So there is such a thin layer that different colors from the background actually shine through. Because my work is threefold, it's science, it's art, and it's consciousness, I actually love that there's different colors coming through. And I really, really enjoy that. So some people like to set up a whole kind of lighting situation and it's the same light in the background all the time, but I personally love the different colors that come through. So what I really have found as I've been kind of going along with this is that the more you do this, the more you start to realize this is actually about relationship. This isn't water just showing me that it can design. This is really about water showing up and showing that it can communicate. So when I did this survey, 298 people filled out the survey, and 85% of people could recognize all 25 images for what the influence was prior to freezing. So if it was a picture of a cat and then a picture of a cat appeared in the ice, 85% of people could say, yes, that looks like a cat, even though they had no idea what they were looking at. And out of all of those images, there were 3 of them where 100% of people could recognize the images for what they were. So this isn't just abstract art. This is actual kind of image recognition. So if you consider this as liquid water going in, and then we're photographing the ice, and it's literally like art, it's quite remarkable. But by molecular count, not by volume, we're 99% water. And even our eye lens is 99% water. So we see the entire world through the lens of water. We're only ever a cut away from leaking or an exercise away from sweating. And all of these different things, and yet we tend to see our body as so solid. And so really, I think there is a huge amount of information to know about what it is to be alive, because every living thing in the world is made with water. Essentially, it's actually water, salts, minerals, and consciousness of some kind. And so there's an interesting relationship between water and salt. We're not fresh water, we're salt water beings. Salt is essentially a crystal. And when a crystal merges into water, we can't see it anymore, but it's there. It gives an electrical charge in it, and it gives a more saline aspect to the water. And so that becomes like a liquid crystal. And we really are liquid crystal antennas. So one of the ways in which we can talk about energy is that we have liquid water inside of us, but we often forget that there is water in the air. And the water in the air is attracted to our electrical charge. And what happens is that we almost are walking around with an entire web of information around us, that the water in the air is actually has a lot of information from what's going on around it and what it's exposed to and what it's picking up on. It literally is like an antenna, and it draws that information into us, into that liquid aspect of us. So it's like when you come close to somebody, but you don't touch them, and you somehow feel like, oh, I feel like I know you somehow. You're really familiar to me. Or maybe you'll go into a house and it just feels like kind of creepy and you can't explain why, but there is an information exchange that is happening in the air that is being picked up by this invisible web that we have and drawn into us. So it's one of the ways in which we can feel, understand energy. So as I've started to develop this work, one of the things that many people have asked me to do is to do repeat studies. So I've often used music, because music is a wonderful thing that you can just play and it's the same song every time. Masaru Emoto did two very extreme music genres. He used classical music versus heavy metal. And I can almost guarantee that the person that did the heavy metal one probably didn't like heavy metal. I have never known water to be in judgment. I don't think that water is ever in any form of judgment. It's an observer. And so people tend to be in judgment. So what is interesting is that because my son, he's 21 this year, but a few years ago he was saying, well, I don't like classical music. Does that mean that the water is like hating it when I'm like driving along and listening to Tupac and listening to my rap and stuff? And I'm like, no, water's not in judgment. And so I went on this journey to try all different genres of music to see what water might do and how it might respond. And what I observed is that water seemed to pick up on a word. For example, one of the songs which really has set me off on a 4-year journey for the last 4 years with something that I call Hydroglyphs was the song called Stairway to Heaven. And what I observed was that I would see the stairway appear in the ice. It was quite remarkable. And because I repeated that song and repeated that test around about 12 times, and each time I saw a stairway in the ice. And I began to wonder, I wonder if that actually means stairway. And so I wrote the word stairway, and I will say that water picks up on, doesn't read words, it reads the energy of words. So many people say, can it understand different languages or symbols? And so of course, because I've also done those tests using different languages and using symbols, but what I would say is that it's really important to remember that water is picking up on the energy of everything. So I wrote the word stairway just out of curiosity to see what would happen. And sure enough, I saw the stairway appear. And I'm like, well, let's do it again. So I did it again. And I did it again. And I ended up doing it 50 times. And I'm like, well, okay, I think I can safely say that this is a symbol for the meaning of stairway or the energy of stairway. But then I was thinking, what do you do with a stairway? And so I thought, well, you climb up it. So I wrote the words climb up, and I did it again. And sure enough, I saw this stairway appear. And so I started to realize this is actually a very complex symbolic language that has layers of meaning. And what I've done, because I have a busy life, I have 3 children and I'm doing all kinds of things, I couldn't always do tests over and over and over again all in a row. So I would do them when I could. So they weren't all done in one day. Sometimes they were done over the course of months. And so what's interesting about doing it that way is that you can't say, well, the information was somehow still resonating in the Petri dish from the last one. The fact that they happen whenever I do them, maybe the next day, maybe a different Petri dish, maybe even different water, and I would see the same imagery. So the water that I like to use is a spring water. I really find that tap water struggles to form as much imagery because it's gone through what I call more trauma. It's gone through a lot of right angles. It tends to have a lot of pollutants in it. Whereas spring water, especially from a deep aquifer, has more ability to share information. Now, I also work with these signature patterns of water. So each different type of water tends to have a signature pattern. Tap water forms very disordered types of patterns. Spring water forms what I call fern hexagons. It's a hexagonal shaped kind of star with little ferns that come off each arm, very similar to a snowflake. You might see ferns in river water. All these different waters tend to have their own pattern. So when I teach people the technique, I say, get to know the patterns of your water. Do at least 10 images with no expectation. Just do it to see what water wants to show you. Once you know what your water looks like, then if you put the water into, say, a singing bowl and play it, and then freeze it, you'll see that there has been a significant change. And that is proof that there has been some kind of evidence to say that whatever you have done with the water has changed it, what I call energetic state of health. So if you have tap water and you know that it has these disordered patterns, and then you play it, pour some into a singing bowl and play it, and then you start to see hexagonal patterns and geometries, you can know that there has been an energetic state of health improvement. And I say that because the water doesn't change chemically, but it changes structurally. So for example, if you were sick and your doctor says you have this disease, and somebody comes to your house and gives you a hug and tells you look beautiful, makes you feel good, you can choose whether you can be happy or sad. So when you have that kind of positive emotion, and that emotion really starts to make you feel good, what you're doing is there is an energetic state of health that improves within you. We all feel it when we start to feel like happy. So I've seen that there's an energetic state of health that also happens in water. So any positive change is a good change towards improvement. And so it's interesting because I've also studied egg albumin, because I'm very interested in water that's naturally informed. So when you study egg white or egg albumin, there is two parts to the egg white. There is this gloopy gelatinous part, and then there's another part that looks very much like saliva. When you freeze that saliva part of the egg white, I've identified 6 patterns that form from free-range, happy chicken eggs. But what I've observed is that caged hen eggs, when you do the same test, they at the very best only form 2 patterns. So it suggests that trauma seems to affect this kind of amniotic fluid stage. It's all very, very interesting, but I posted something on social media, I don't know, must have been about a month ago, where I went, when I was in the States, I went to this farm, and it was biodynamic farm, organic, all these different things, happy hens, and I got some of those eggs. And then I got some caged eggs. And what I did was I put one of those eggs, which I'd already tested and I knew it was beautiful, one of the good eggs, and I put the bad egg right beside it and I left them overnight. The next day I tested them both. What was interesting is that for the very first time, I saw that the caged hen egg had actually improved in its crystallography. It was able to form more than 2 patterns. And it suggested that the information, there was an information exchange. And so naturally, when people saw that, they said, yeah, but what if you're surrounded by really, really bad eggs? Lots and lots of bad eggs. Because that's often this human idea and experience that if one good thing is surrounded by bad things, will it be influenced? And so I did that. I put one of the good eggs and I surrounded it by about 12 caged hen eggs, and I left them overnight. And what I observed that in proximity to the circles of these eggs, the ones that were directly beside the good egg improved to such a degree that they were quite remarkably beautiful. And as they extended out, they still improved, but they didn't improve as much. So if you then bring that into terms of people and the fact that we are bodies of water that are sensitive to thoughts and emotions and environment, working on ourselves suggests that being actually our own good egg is in fact going to help others just by the fact that we are near them. I remember I've spent a lot of time in India, and my teacher over there, he said, you know, there have been many great teachers and many saints that have come to the earth, and their energy emanates so far that it will affect people that they will never, ever meet, because it has traveled to such a distance. And when I see these tests with eggs, you know, it's very interesting, and that really resonates for me. But I've also had tests where I've had 2 glasses of water, 1 tap water, 1 spring water. And the spring water, I had a healing experience with this particular spring water, and it was 9.9 pH naturally out of the ground, nothing done to it. The tap water was around about a 7.2. And what I did was I left them overnight side by side. And when I tested the tap water the next day, I observed not only had it structurally improved, but it had also, I found that its pH had actually gone up slightly, which was really interesting. And that ties in with the work that Luc Montaigne did, which you can Google, which is essentially he could put 2 vials of water side by side. One he put a sequence of DNA into, the other one there was no DNA in it. They were side by side, exposed to radiant light overnight. When the next day came and they tested the water that had nothing in it, they actually put some kind of powder in there to see if it could show if it had any DNA. And they found that there was actually evidence of DNA in the water that had originally had none. So, you know, his work has been, some people think it's amazing and real and incredible, and others say, oh, it's all just pseudoscience. But I've understood and heard that it has been repeated. And that then makes you really wonder, you know, what information transfer is happening just by being near people. Like, really, it's a very, very interesting thing. It really brings to light that idea that we are really all connected, and perhaps in many, many more ways than we could have possibly imagined. So just bringing it back around to this symbols that I was talking about, that started with the stairway to heaven and that kind of stairway symbol. I now have 35 what I've termed as hydroglyphs, these ice symbols that have meaning. And they've taken me 4 years to identify, because to say I have one hydroglyph, I have to have repeated the test at least 50 times and seen the same result each time. I have people around the world now helping me to identify the layers of meaning. And so it's incredibly interesting to see how much they overlap with hieroglyphs, and that they are symbols with conceptual meanings that are designed not to be read, but to be felt. So it's more a matter of me now trying to re-educate myself in a different way, in a way where I really have to figure out what this feels like to me, what conceptual meanings really are, because they're so big. They're not reduced down to this is a phone. It's more around what is this a symbol of to me? If you were to look at every single thing that we see, which is all information, and then ask the question, what does this symbolize to me? We would view it quite differently. So when you look at the phone, we could say this is a phone. But if we were to look at this and say this is a symbol, we call it a phone, but what does it mean to me? Then that is going to give you a whole different view on everything. So if everything we see with these fourth phase water eyes is a symbol, that's my freezer making noise. it kind of makes us see the world in a slightly different way. It's actually a very, very interesting way to start viewing things, because it takes away kind of a lot of what we think we know. It brings a lot more meaning into our lives. Even with people, we could say we attach labels to people and ourselves. I could say, I'm Veda. My freezer has a lot to say tonight. but to you, you could say, well, okay, she's Veda, and I could suggest to you, well, what do I mean to you? So tonight we're listening to lots of different people, and I'm talking about things that water can show us. So what does that mean to you? And that brings in so well with what I suggest to people. For people that really struggle to believe, like, how is it possible that water can design this face and this face and this face? And I've done that a lot, where I've actually used different people's photographs and put my petri dish of water on top of them, frozen it using my technique, and seen their particular features showing. So it's not just random, it's very, very real. When you see the thousands of photos I share, it kind of brings it into a whole different way of viewing it. But then the question keeps coming up, well, what does it mean? What does this all mean? And I don't know that I have the answer to that. I think it's going to mean something different for each person. So when I say, and it's interesting, when I actually show a number of scientists the work, and they see the hand, or they see the face, or they see the shape, quite often they're kind of freaked out. It's kind of like, what is this? What is this magic? And so, because it almost, for some people, it's so mind-bending, I suggest, well, if you find it really hard to get your mental head around, why don't you just see it as art? Because when you see something as art, and you could see it as organic art, then rather than question, well, how, and all those things that the logical mind is desperate to understand, you can say, well, what does this image mean to me? Gosh, isn't that amazing that that came out of the freezer? And you don't just throw it away so it loses its meaning. It actually gains meaning for you when you incorporate it as an art piece. And so, but what I'm happy about is that actually the science world is starting to become interested in this, especially within the repeated studies. And I'm encouraged by that, because really I think there's incredibly profound and important here. And my friend Jerry Pollack, he actually said, if you put this whole study together, and you put together all the repeated studies, which I've been working on, and I'm nearly there, then really, when you see this and you see the evidence of it, and you have other people doing it, which I do, then this, he said, could be one of the most important discoveries of our time. And whenever I have these workshops and teach people how to do that, I say that to them. This can be one of the most important discoveries of our time, and you can be part of that. This isn't just about me having this special relationship with water. We are all having relationships with water, because we're all bodies of water having relationships with one another, with nature, with animals, with our natural world. And so I think there is something incredibly important about this discovery. And so, I mean, there's many things I could talk about, but I can see that I'm also only have a few minutes left. How does your mood affect? Well, one of the things I think about is I've studied bodily fluids as well. And I've often thought that if eyes are the windows to the soul, then tears are an expression of spirit. And I think that water really is emotion, And tears particularly are emotion that we can both see, taste, and touch. If you were to say, you know, what does an emotion look like? The only way we can really talk about it is what our face makes when we're happy, or when we're sad, or this person makes me feel like this by doing this. But tears are actually an emotion we can see. And I learned something recent, well, in the last few months, that I found very interesting. Tears are also designed as a medicine for us. So in our deepest sorrow, when we're really, really crying from the depths of our in that pain, our face is designed a specific way where tears roll from our eyes, around our cheeks, back into our mouth. They're actually designed, it's designed to be a medicine to help heal and ease our hearts. And I find that this is just another example of how sophisticated the water within us really is, and how well it knows us. And whether water is consciousness or water is the glove on the hand of consciousness, I really believe, after seeing so much evidence, water isn't just reacting to these influences. Water appears to be responding. And that is a very different, huge leap. It's like a quantum leap in this idea that perhaps water isn't what we have always thought it was. In ancient times and in indigenous times, my father is Maori, and there is this belief that we have as a culture that water is in fact a living being. It's not it's not a resource, it's a relative. And when we think about it in these terms, in ancient times, water wasn't called water. It was called the waters. And then it became water when plumbing came into being in Roman times. And then it's getting reduced down to H2O. But actually, where you'll hear that term, the waters, still, is when we say her waters broke, because it's still considered the sacred water source. And so I actually personally think that water isn't a resource, it is source. And when you start applying this concept and idea to many different very big world questions and world views, it starts to actually make sense, which is a very, very interesting thing. And I realize I've spoken for 45 minutes and I don't want to go over. I'm sure you have many people all lined up. So I could go on for another 3 hours, but it's also just about midnight here too. So I might have to leave it at that.
I could easily listen another 3 hours. It's so many, it's amazing. I mean, it's just opened up my mind. And especially the description of the good influence and how it influences its surroundings. And I guess the opposite would be true. If you had the bad egg in the middle, would influence its surroundings.
It's interesting, that concept. But in fact, I think because eggs are in fact so primordial and they're in that early stage of wanting to improve, nature actually wants to improve. Mm. So it doesn't serve you well if you're in an embryonic stage and you're not doing well. You actually want to improve. I think it's more natural to actually want to improve. If you look at it just from a kind of early beginnings stage, it doesn't serve anybody for us to degrade. It actually serves life much better to improve. So I think that actual improvement is based upon that. That's actually more a natural.
Uh-oh, hold on just a minute. I'll mute them. Oh, they are. Go ahead.
I think because we've become adults and we've become very cynical as we've aged, we often tend to think bad can overcome, will take over. But actually, I don't think that's true in the natural world. not, I think in this particular primordial stage with these eggs, I think actually life wants to improve.
Well, let's all seek to be in positive influencers. It's just wonderful. I'm so pleased that you came and shared whatever you could manage to fit into this time. It's wonderful work. It's so inspiring. I'm just really excited. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Wow, definitely. Well, let's see.